Alright, here we go. The torture lecture. Here we are, the origins of American justice. The Dark Ages. Alright. The Dark Ages were from 600 to 1300, as you can see. In reality, the time goes back further than that, but they're going to keep it short as possible, because this is an area, and there's many other time periods before this where you'll see specks of information hopping in and out, and a lot of things were destroyed because of the immorality and the intelligence level and the amount of wars that were going on. So, King William the Bastard. King William the Bastard. His father's name is Robert the Devil. The Domesday Book is a manuscript record of the Great Survey of much of England. He sent his counselors all over to each shire to find out what or how much each landholder had in land and livestock and what it was worth. William the Conqueror used torture to extract treasure from the Anglo-Saxons in their new kingdom. Convicts of double dealing were tortured by having their eyes gouged out and castrated. He was the first to divide church and state courts. He introduced capital punishment, that is beheading. Okay, so he started the first tax system, basically. Okay, now the Tower of London, which William the Conqueror built. Alright, and the reason I put this here is because of the moat. I never believed that there was a moat around castles, and obviously there was, as you can see it right here. Okay, now the Tower of London was the first fortress. It was the first jail and torture chamber, first large jail, the first printing mint for the dollar, or well, at that time it was called the coinage, and it was also the first zoo. The first zoo scenario happened underneath King Henry VIII, and also the extinction of the Barbary lion occurred because of all of the debauchery that was going on with animals that they shipped in. Now, the Tyburn Gallows. From 1200 until 1783, more than 50,000 men, women, and children died at Tyburn. Noble lords, child pickpockets, whores, great ladies, and such famous highwaymen as Claude Duval, Jonathan Wild, and Jack Sheppard. The original gallows was merely the branch of an oak growing at the spot. Then a gallows in the form of an inverted L was erected. The first effort to alleviate the condemned's sufferings was to allow him to mount a ladder resting against the crossbar, have the noose put around his neck, and then jump, thus breaking his neck. Right here, this is the site where the tree was at, the first tree of Tyburn. Right here is what you see is the triple tree that they were famous, that they were known for having. They were famous for this because they were the first ones to create it, and they could hang many bodies at one time. So, the Tyburn Gallows was the main place of execution for London and Middlesex until 1783. It was also the place where women were burnt for petty treason and high treason, and soldiers shot for military offenses. The execution process began at around 7 o'clock in the morning, when the condemned men and women would be led in fetters, handcuffs, and leg irons into the press yard in Newgate. On arrival at Tyburn around noon, some 2 to 3 hours after they had left Newgate, the prisoners were greeted by a large crowd of anything up to 100,000 people who had come to watch the spectacle. The gallows at Tyburn were surrounded by a circle of stands, admission ranging from half a crown to 5 guineas, depending on how many and how famous the criminals might be. The houses overlooking the gallows also rented their windows and rooftops to spectators. On a good hanging day, as many as 30,000 people would turn out. The 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War happened in between England and France. Alright? I put this in here because of the course of how long the war went on. There was many wars that went on during the time period besides this one. And during war, there's a lot of tortures that go on as well. So, you got Vlad the Impaler, real name is Vlad Tepes. Now, the Ottoman Turkish Empire was at war with Wallachia in 1462. Sultan Mehmed II fled with his army at the sight of 20,000 impaled corpses rotting on the outskirts of Vlad's capital city, Dragovist. Upper limits of Vlad's combined atrocities put the death toll at around 100,000. He roasted children whom he fed to their mothers, and he cut off the breasts of women and forced their husbands to eat them. After that, he had them all impaled. Dracula once invited all the sick, vagrants, and beggars over to one of his homes, under the pretext of a feast. Dracula politely excused himself and had the entire court boarded up, then burned the whole building to the ground while everybody was still inside. He did this multiple times. Impalement was pretty much the only punishment whether you stole a loaf of bread or committed murder. Vlad III would invite a few guests to his mansion, provide them with a feast, and then have them immediately impaled right there at the dinner table. With the bodies still draped over the stakes, he would leisurely finish his own dinner and then dip his bread into the blood collecting below the bodies. Alright. This is the Spanish Inquisition. Okay. Take a quick look at what we got going on here. You got somebody getting raked back here. You got other things going on that we will be describing here shortly. Okay. The noontide of the papacy was the world's moral midnight. The Holy Scriptures were almost unknown, not only to the people but to the priests. Like the Pharisees of old, the papist leaders hated the light which would reveal their sins. God's law, the standard of righteousness, having been removed, they exercised power without limit and practiced vice without restraint. Fraud, avarice, and profligacy prevailed. Men shrank from no crime by which they could gain wealth or position. The palaces of popes and prelates were scenes of the vilest debauchery. Some of the reigning pontiffs were guilty of crimes so revolting that secular rulers endeavored to dispose these dignitaries of the church as monsters too vile to be tolerated. For centuries, Europe had made no progress in learning, arts, or civilization. A moral and intellectual paralysis had fallen upon Christendom. The Pope gave the inquisitors the most unlimited powers as judges delegated by him, and immediately representing his person, they were permitted to excommunicate or sentence to death whom they thought proper upon the slightest information of hearsay, were allowed to publish crusades against all whom they deemed heretics, and enter into league with sovereign princes to join those crusades with their forces. In the United Kingdom of Castile and Aragon, there were 18 different inquisitorial courts, having each its counselors termed apostolical inquisitors, its secretaries, sergeants, and other officers. Besides these, there were 20,000 familiars dispersed throughout the kingdom, who acted as spies and informers, and were employed to apprehend all suspected persons and commit them for trial to the prisons which belonged to the Inquisition. This is very similar to what we have going on today, with cameras everywhere on your street corners, okay? Now, a simple narrative of the proceedings of the Inquisition has shocked the world, and the cruelty of it has become proverbial. Nothing ever displayed so fully to the eyes of mankind the spirit and temper of the papal religion. Let us hear the description which Voltaire, a very competent witness, gives of it. Their form of proceeding is an infallible way to destroy whomsoever the inquisitors wish. The prisoners are not confronted with the accuser or informer, nor is there any informer or witness who is not listened to. A public convict, a notorious malefactor, an infamous person, a child, are in holy office, though nowhere else, credible accusers and witnesses. Even the son may depose against his father, the wife against her husband. The wretched prisoner is no more made acquainted with his crime than with his accuser, and were he told the one, it might possibly lead him to guess the other. To avoid this, he is compelled by tedious confinement in a noisome dungeon where he never sees a face but the jailer's, and is not permitted the use of either book or pen and ink. Or should confinement alone not be sufficient, he is compelled by the most excruciating tortures to inform against himself, to discover and confess the crime laid to his charge, of which he is often ignorant. So, this is in relation to today on how we have so many men coming out of jail that were falsely accused of crimes. But these melancholy effects of the Inquisition are a trifle when compared with those public sacrifices called the auto de fe, or act of faith, and to the shocking barbarities that precede them. A priest in a white surplice, or a monk who has vowed meekness and humility, causes his fellow creatures to be put to the torture in a dismal dungeon. A stage is erected in the public marketplace, where the condemned prisoners are conducted to the stake, attended with a train of monks and religious confraternities. They sing psalms, say mass, and butcher mankind. Were a native of Asia to come to Madrid upon a day of an execution of this sort, it would be impossible for him to tell whether it were a rejoicing, a religious feast, a sacrifice, or a massacre, and yet it is all these together. Here is a picture of a auto de fe, an act of faith. Pay attention to, we got bodies impaled on the stakes right here as they are marching, okay? And we also have efficacies of Jesus right here, okay? Now, the Inquisition varied from country to country, from period to period, and as the torture in the dungeons was kept secret, no one can definitely say what took place. This is King Henry VIII, 1491, 1547. King Henry VIII. The number of executions done under King Henry amounted to 72,000 people, or 1,895 people every year. That would be close to about 6 people a day. He would have your ears cut off if you did not show up to divine service on Sunday, and the scavenger's daughter, which is a torture device, was created during his reign. Okay. This is his daughter. And this is also where the term Bloody Mary comes from. Mary first began to earn her unofficial title of Bloody Mary when she had her cousin, Lady Jane Grey, executed to prevent any possible power struggle. She had more than 300 persons burned at the stake for hearsay, and she led a large attack on the Protestants. Okay. This is Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Alright. The highest number of her victims cited during Bathory's trial was 650 women. She tortured and killed her victims. The Countess is best known for bathing in her victims' blood to retain beauty or youth. Sadistic pleasure is considered a far more plausible motive for Elizabeth Bathory's crimes. Now, this whole beauty or youth thing, and retaining the beauty or youth, is a theory that was brought back to Europe from a man named E. Ponce de Leon, and he was told this theory as a fable from the Native Americans. Alright. And that same theory is used today for our cosmetic industry and to destroy the self-esteem of women. Now, African slave trade, 1600 and 1900. 30 Years' War. This was later on. Now, I mentioned 2 different wars here, and the reason being is because if we were to go detailed into history in Europe of this time period from 700 to 1700, I can show you well over 100, maybe even close to 200 different battles, successions, revolutions, rebellions. They titled them in all different types of ways to try and hide the fact that it was just battle. They also titled them battles, and battles weren't necessarily considered to be a whole part of a war, okay, at that time as well. So, anyways, witch hunts from the 1450 to 1750. Now, witch hunts in the Spanish Inquisition can be considered one and the same thing, but then at the same time, it is also divisible, and that's why it's done throughout history to hide certain, psychological positions of hatred towards females, which is definitely shown if you were to do a thorough study in this subject, or in the witch hunts, or in the Spanish Inquisition. Now, in the witch hunt, it's estimated over 9 million executions occurred. Now, we have to understand that in this span of this 300 years, as I stated, it was also Spanish Inquisition. So, they were considering all 50 countries of Europe, is what you have to include. And then, what they did to the Native American Indians over here is also classified underneath quote-unquote witch hunts. When you research it, you'll run into all of those scenarios, okay? Now, let's go over it. The accused was taken to a convenient room, stripped naked and tied in a sitting position on a stool for 24 hours without food or sleep. All witches had a familiar, a sort of pet demon that visited them at least once a day, and the demon might take... And the demon might take any shape. If any living creature, including a fly, was seen in the room during this period, it had to be the witch's familiar, and her doom was sealed. In case no flies showed up, Hopkins still wasn't beaten. Witches fed their familiars from a spot on the body from which the demon sucked a special fluid. This place was insensible to pain, so Hopkins and his assistants stuck needles into the accused until she either confessed to being a witch or they found some numb spot. There are several such spots in the human anatomy, and one of Hopkins' helpers, an older woman named Gotti Phillips, knew them all. However, in case Gotti was off testing another witch, Hopkins would usually get a girl to confess by saying, "I have tested you everywhere with this long needle, except up the nipples of your breast. Do you confess, or shall I try there next?" Most girls confessed, and when they used this needle was usually stuck up your fingernails and up your toenails, and it was used red hot. Now, this is important. In places where women were generally oppressed, they were more likely to become torture victims for things that were perfectly natural, like having a libido. For having a sex drive, women would be tortured. During the Spanish Inquisition, it was believed that women lost their souls when they had their menstrual cycles. Therefore, women were inherently heretics. A woman could have been burned at the stake just for having a menstrual cycle. Around the same time in Florence, Italy, there was an insane but widely influential monk named Girolamo Savonarola who condemned women just for being beautiful or for wearing cosmetics. Okay. Now the Black Plague went on from 1360 to 1667. What you have to understand is that it would happen sporadically. It would come and go, come and go, come and go. But when it happened sporadically, it took thousands and thousands of lives. Now, this is what is very interesting. This is what the Black Plague looks like. Okay, so if we go back, 1360, this is before the slave time, the slavery occurred, okay? The African slave trade, and they had hardcore imagery of dead bodies looking like this inside of their mind. So we might go into that and talk about that a little bit further later on in other lectures. But this is what the Black Plague looked like. If you look at the date here, we have 2012. This happened to a man in Idaho. He was bitten by a cat. Okay, so now, the word torture. The action or practice of inflicting severe pain on someone as a punishment or to force them to do or say something, or for the pleasure of the person inflicting the pain. Okay? The word torture comes from the word tort. Alright? Torts and crimes at common law originate in the Germanic system of compensatory fines for wrongs, with no clear distinction between crimes and other wrongs. Okay, there's no clear distinction, but we will choose if we want to charge you or if we want to cut your hand off. Okay, now corporal punishment. Corporal punishment is a form of physical punishment that involves the deliberate infliction of pain in order to punish a person convicted of a crime or as retribution for a perceived offense, including physical chastisement such as spanking, paddling, or caning of minors by parents, guardians, or school or other officials. Official punishment by the infliction of pain or injury, including flogging, branding, and amputation, was practiced in most civilizations since ancient times. By the late 20th century, corporal punishment had been eliminated from the legal systems of most developed countries. Now, capital punishment, which is death penalty or execution, is punishment by death. The sentence that someone be punished in this manner is a death sentence. Crimes that can result in a death penalty are known as capital crimes or capital offenses. The term capital originates from Latin capitalis, literally meaning regarding the head, referring to execution by beheading. Okay. Sadism, masochism. Masochism, deriving sexual gratification from pain inflicted on oneself, rather than sadism, in which gratification is derived from pain inflicted on others. There is no physical basis for sadism. It is purely a psychological phenomenon. It is, however, far more common than masochism. Psychologists have argued that all interest in cruelty or scenes of violence, including the gun battles in TV westerns, is basically sadistic. Okay? Yeah, basically sadistic. So anybody who likes horror movies or UFC or MMA, they're one of these torture cats. Okay? They get a pleasure from watching death. Alright? For instance, there was one guy in Germany who was a serial killer, and he stated to a psychologist that he actually achieved the orgasm by watching a woman cough up blood. Alright. It is clear from a careful study of the history of medieval times that virtue and amiability amongst the middle and lower classes, generally speaking, did not prevail. Men, says Pike, branded on the forehead, without hands, without feet, without tongues, lived as an example of the danger which attended the commission of petty crimes, and as a warning to all men who had the misfortune of holding no higher position than that of a churl. Wealthy people might do wrong with impunity. It has been clearly shown that there was one law for the rich and another for the poor in England during the 4th centuries which preceded the Norman conquest. William the Bastard, he was a Norman king. Now, towards the close of the 13th century, judicial torture flourished in Italy as strong as it did in the days of the Caesars. Gradually, it spread into other countries, with the result that by the birth of the 17th century, there was scarcely for the finding a European state. Scandinavia appears to have been the one exception, where torture was not looked upon as a necessary part of criminal procedure. In Germany, in France, and in Spain, judicial torture became incorporated in the regular penal system. Now, the pit of rats. The pit of rats is a pit of hungry rats. And they can be used in a multiple form, used many different ways, or we could just throw you in there. Okay, and they'll eat on you. Now, the little E's. The little E's is a cell 4 feet high, 16 inches wide, 2 feet long. So designed that a prisoner could not stand up, lie down, or even sit. Okay? Now, the Cave of Roses. In Sweden, there was a Cave of Roses, a pit full of poisonous snakes, toads, lizards, They put scorpions and other things in there, everything that was poisonous, which continued until it was closed by Gustavus III in 1772. Now, the Saxon and Danish kings executed criminals by hanging, beheading, and drowning. Drowning seemed to be a favorite method. Many kings maintained a special drowning pit, and as late as the reign of King John, the owner of the Baynard's Castle, London, had the right to drown criminals in the Thames. John himself used to extract money from wealthy Jews by having their teeth pulled. I put that in there because this is it isn't this statement, but I've read it in other literature. Around the same time period is when gold teeth were first made. Okay, the rat torture. The rat torture is we take one of those hungry rats out of the pit of rats, and we throw it in the bucket, and we put it on your stomach, and we heat the bucket until the rat eats through your stomach and tries to hide in your intestines, because that's what it'll do. Now, there's another form where we can put you in the German chair, and the German chair is a cage around your head, and then we enclose the cage, and we put the rat in the cage, and the rat will eat on your head slowly but surely. Now, oblate, which is also the root word to obliterate, but this word being French is enunciated oublier. Oublier is how it's enunciated. So, France was particularly famous for her oubliers, from the word meaning to forget. These were dungeons shaped like an inverted funnel and trapdoor at the top. When the victim stepped on the door, it opened under him, and he fell into the cell from which there was no escape. Louis XI is said to have killed 4,000 victims in oubliers, in obliques. Okay? Now, what I thought was very funny was the shape of the cell, like being like a parachute. But also understand the cone right here, and then this is where the trap door would be, and then you fall in the bottom right here. And then while you're down here, sometimes they'll throw a limb down here, they'll throw a hand down here to mess with your psyche. And then they had these cell shapes mastered, and they would have little airways designed to let the smell go out. Okay, so the bators. Okay, prisoners were beaten with the bator, or the battledore, an instrument like the paddle used in ping pong, but studded with nails. And this is also the root to the paddle that they used in school. Notice this real thick one right here. This will break your bone. Okay. Now, if you look at this picture right here, you'll see the man bleeding from all the nails they put in there. Okay. Now the chastity belt. Okay, this one here is French. I think this one here is Old England. You see the heart and the anal right here. If we could pay attention. Alright. No, let me go back and say this. These weren't usually, they like to propagate, or they like to say that the chastity belt was made because the husband didn't want his wife to have sex while she was on long trips. If that was the case, he thought of her as a whore, obviously. Or secondly, what the real deal was is that these women wore these things to as they wore them to stop rape. Okay, there's rape prevention, and there's many different forms. There's about 4 to 5 different forms of chastity belts, and they designed them as you can see here, and they started putting all types of cloth. Some of them are lined with cloth on the inside, and patterns and words written all over them everywhere. And the lock part is very real. Now, this is a male chastity belt. As in those times, they had women that they called viragos. And virago is basically like Virgo with an A in between the R and the G, and it means a masculine woman. Okay? So I think they're trying to play with the whole energy of what the Virgo represents by naming it Virgo and it being so close to that word. Anyways, this is not a chastity belt. what this is a ring that stops erections. This was created in the 1830s in the Victorian era. Okay? And at that time, they thought masturbation was evil, and masturbation could bring you to the point of insanity and even to death. So this tool, and they thought having an erection at night or waking up in the morning with an erection was unhealthy. So they used this tool to stop said erection. Okay. The heretic's fork. This is for those yapping that mouth. Okay? You're speaking against the one true Messiah. Alright? We put this underneath your chin to see how you like it. This is for those playing the bad music. We should come out with this for the hip-hop. The Shane flute. You see it? If you come to the market playing that malarkey, we're going to put you up in the Shane flute, my dude. And the children will mock you. You see the children mocking him? The children are involved. And then we're going to put you up here and everybody going to laugh at you. Notice there's another one right here. Somebody else going to get locked up in here. So we put your fingers up in these holes and we squeeze it real tight. And put that ring around your neck. And have you sit there for some hours. Another one. Okay. You come in here playing this badass music, we gonna shut you down. Not in the market. Okay. Now, we still use this phrase to describe excessive brutality. We get other expressions from this 900-year-old town. On the walls of the room were hanging ancient yokes in which an adulterous man and woman were fastened together and then ordered to carry buckets of water up the steep hill in the center of town to the castle. Staggering under the weight of the heavy yoke, it was no wonder that Jack and Jill often fell down and cracked their crowns as the salacious old jingle, now a children's nursery rhyme, describes. This torture device is called the Jack and Jill. And it comes in many different forms. Not just this one. It also comes in this one right here. And I've also seen it in the V shape. Now, if you pay attention, if you can see it right here, it says church pillory punishments. Let's see what's going on. So these are the original rosary beads. For those of the Spanish, the Roman Catholic Spanish culture. You wear the rosary beads, the Mexican gangsters. This was originally a torture device coming out of Catholicism. Rosary beads, this was for the ecclesiastical punishments. On Sunday during church, the sinner was put inside the church or at the church door, wearing the rosary around his neck. These punishments were for sleeping in church and offending God. In Germany, the congregation came together once a year and were examined on the Bible and catechism. It was also punishable if one did not attend church on Sunday. This was easily found out. Since everyone had their own specific place in church, each citizen had to live his life in a God-fearing manner and abide by the commandments. So they went door to door, checking about you and the Lord. Okay? Now, a gambler's necklace. Okay? You see that? A gambler was forced to wear a heavy necklace composed of huge wooden playing cards and dice. Drunkards were put into the drunkard's clack, a barrel-like arrangement with an opening at the top for the man's head and no bottom so he could walk the streets. Now this is the gambler's necklace. Looking at this necklace, it could probably weigh maybe about 30 to 50 pounds. And this was also put on the cheaters too. If you cheated while you were playing, while you were gambling at a local house or whatever. Now, the drunkard's cloak. Okay, as you can see here, this is very real. And this right here is called the scarlet letter, when they make you wear a letter representing your crime. Okay? Now, this is a real drunkard's cloak right here. This is found in Germany. And some of these do not have the bottom open. So what they would do is in the ones that didn't have the bottom open, they would just come up to you and just feed you more liquor and make you keep drinking and make you keep drinking and make you, you'll fill the whole barrel up with excrement, and you'll be sitting in your feces and in your urine. Okay? Now, this is the branding. This is how the branding went down. In the reign of Edward VI in 1547, an act was passed from which it appears that any person who had offered them work which they refused was authorized to brand them on the breast with a V, hold them in slavery for 2 years, feed them during that period on bread and water, and hire them out to others. Okay? So how many people you know today who have turned down work, alright, that would need to be branded? Okay. Now, T for thief, V for vagabond or vagrant, B for blasphemer, A for adulterer, F for fornicator, D for drunk, G for gambler, S for slave, U for unbeliever, HM for highwayman, F for fray maker, that means a trouble starter or a rioter, M for manslaughter, P for perjurer, R for rogue, SL for seditious libeler, and SS for sower of sedition. And they were very serious about name calling. The majority of the cases that you see in the courts was somebody accusing them of being something that they weren't, and somebody accusing somebody else, But anyways, I also saw a number of branding irons, one of Conrad's favorite methods for determining guilt. Before being branded, the accused was asked to pray that the iron would not sear his flesh. If the iron burned him, it was considered proof of his guilt. That's how it went down. If the iron burned you, you were in lineage with the devil. That's right. Okay. The iron shoes. This one right here on the left hand side would have to be supervised. They would be whipping you when they put this on your foot. They put this on your foot while it was red hot. And then you gotta see, if you notice, there's spikes right here and there's spike holes. So every time you step down, the spikes come and puncture your heels. Alright? And they would make you run as they're whipping you with this. And remind you the shoes are red hot while you're running. Okay? And they're whipping you. This one right here is unsupervised. This one right here, they put on your foot red hot and it stays there. And the bells ring. So every time you step, we know the criminal is coming. Okay. The scold's brittle, used on shrewish women, was an iron mask that included a gag for the mouth. Sometimes the gag was covered with spikes, and some even had a device like a wheel spur, or the prisoner might be tarred and feathered and ridden on a rail, to the great delight of the whole community. To the great delight. Entertainment. Okay? So yeah, these are big iron masks that they would put on the women for running the yapper. Okay? And we have to understand. And then today, it's kind of funny, I ran into an article. Jeb Bush publicly stated that single mothers should be publicly shamed. I'm serious. I ran into an article, okay? So you have to pay attention to what's going on with society right now. And pay attention to these movies that's coming out too. Alright, now understand, this one right here is a scold's brittle for a male. The big nose, the nose means that he's in other people's business. The horns means that his wife was cheating on him, and they had a lot of that. You'll see a lot of that in the books on what it states. Okay. His wife was cheating on him and she's cheating on her and all this. I even read across a couple of situations where the queen asked the king to go out and get some get some bone from another man in the city to go spend the night with her husband, okay? So then the snakes on the head right here means that he has bad thoughts or satanic thoughts. You got the pig mask, okay? Understand they got a big fascination with the pig masks. Now here goes some more pig masks right here. Some more skulls, some branks. Okay. Now prisoners were put into the stocks. The soles of their bare feet were coated with brine, and goats allowed to lick them until they went insane. As you see right here, they're caged to the wall. You see the chain, and they got a collar on to the wall, and they got the branks on their head. And this dude right here getting his feet licked by the goat, by the pet goat, and the goat about to drive him insane. And the other kid is inducing the insanity by tickling the little kid's face. Tickling the man's face. And then his arms are locked up in the stock as well. Now, over here, this is a head cage. You must understand that this is a head cage. This is not a branks. These are branks and skulls brittles right here. Alright, now, here goes some more. Y'all pay attention right here. This is a big one right here. The big ears, okay? Pay attention. Now, the brank may be described simply as an iron framework which was placed on the head, enclosing it in a kind of cage. It had in front a plate of iron which, either sharpened or covered with spikes, was so situated as to be placed in the mouth of the victim, and if she attempted to move her tongue in any way whatsoever, it was certain to be shockingly injured. With a brank on her head, she was conducted through the streets, led by a chain, held by one of the town's officials, an object of contempt, and subjected to the jeers of the crowd, and often led to their mercy. In some towns, it was the custom to chain the culprit to the pillory, whipping post, or market cross. She thus suffered for telling her mind to some petty tyrant in office, or speaking nicely to a wrongdoer, or for taking to task a lazy and perhaps a drunken husband. Okay? So you rats out there that's out there messing around with the drunkard husband and the lazy game, the video game playing husband, we need to situate a branks for you. Yeah, we need to let the world know. Okay, this is the iron mask. Okay. The iron mask was supposedly made by Christians. It was applied to the head red hot. As you can definitely see, this one has been used several times. Okay. It was applied to the head red hot. And it'll take off your eyeballs, your skin, your scalp, and everything else. Alright. This is beheading. This one is found in the Tower of London. This one right here is found in Germany. Notice the similarities to today's meat cleaver with the type of blade we have here. Okay. Now, beheading ranked, relatively speaking, as an honorable end. Hanging was considered disgraceful and was usually reserved for thieves and criminals of low birth. The substitution of the sword for the halter was considered a favor in such cases. This happened in 1609. Out of regard for the felon's two daughters who complained that their betrothed would refuse to marry the children of one who had been hanged. So my kids ain't finna marry your kids, nigga. And you over here, you done been hung for snatching the purse, okay? Okay? Now here he is, the executioner mask. The executioner was an extraordinary, awesome apparition, clothed from head to foot in a black garment, with his head and face covered except for two eye holes, with a black cowl. He represented a most diabolical and satanic appearance. Okay? These are real executioner masks, okay? I can't say what country they come from. Alright? Now, executioner's robe, right here. Alright? And this here is a hangman's hood. Pay very close attention. That's a hangman's hood of old Europe. This has nothing to do with America. Okay. Now the executioner's swords. Pay attention to the square edge. I do not know what that means, but everything has meaning. So, if we have any weapon historians out there, okay, or any war historians, please give us the insight. Okay. Now, these swords are also double-handed. If you can notice the big handles on them, because there was a specific way they swung them as well during the course of a beheading. Now, this is the Morning Star mace. Mace compared to the mace that we use today. Now we have here, this is called the schlag. Alright? This mace right here is the original. It is not the one with the chain. When you look up old Europe, you find these everywhere. You don't find none with any chain. The ones with the chain, I do believe, are false. In the course of war, it doesn't match with how you would use it. You would have to start swinging it, and then the swinging you may not have control of. Say your horse might get hit while you're riding, or you see what I'm saying? There's too many things that can occur. So I don't believe it was the chain. We have to go with the reality. And the reality is the one that was right here, the stick, okay? Now, next. Now, the low. The low also means lion. The definition for low is lion, okay? That's what the word etymologically is defined as. Now, besides that, it's also interesting that it is spelled like Lowe's, the department store. Now, Lowe's, the department store, as they use this word, also use the symbol of the Egyptian death temple. The Egyptian death temple is the house that they use for Lowe's, okay? Now, understand, because Lowe's is a department store assisting in building your home. And your home, you have to get a what? A mortgage, right? And the mortgage is what? The death pledge. That's what literally the word mortgage means, okay? Now, the Low, or hangman's assistant, was a remarkable personage. Originally, he acted as a market policeman who cleared the town of refuse, dead animals, diseased cattle, and adulterated goods. Making his rounds to the beat of a drum, he broke up groups of gamblers and roughs, buried unclaimed corpses, burnt the bodies of suicides, drummed the blasphemy out of the city, pilloried and branded criminals, and lent a hand to his chief in the torture chamber. So, this sounds like the modern day policeman who has control of the body. Huh? Whether the body is dead or alive, the policeman has control of the body. Now, leaning a hand to his chief, the chief would be the judge, and the torture chamber would most definitely be the jail. So, he had to bury unclaimed bodies and burnt the bodies of the suicides. So that means that their everyday lifestyle there might be a random body just laying here in the middle of the road some goddamn where. And then when I see the body, I have to make sure if it was killed by somebody or if it was a suicide, because obviously they were dealt with in different ways. He buried the unclaimed corpses but burnt the suicide bodies. You see what I'm saying? So that's what we got here. Hangman's hood. This one is German and this one here is Scottish, my friends. Okay? Pay attention. What we have. The hangman. Hanging persons was almost a daily occurrence in the early years of the present century. For forging notes, passing forged notes, and other crimes which we now almost regard with indifference. Alright? Children as young as 7 years were often hanged. In fact, as late as 1833, a 9-year-old child was sentenced to be hanged for breaking a window pane. Alright? Now, if it was as late as 1833, this is in Europe, you know, slavery was going on hardcore in America, okay? You had to be seriously doing some crime as a white male to get, or as a white child to be getting hung at 9 years old in America. From what we know, the history of America might say something completely different if we were to go look up in the papers. You see what I'm saying? We go look up in the documents. Now, Here we go. Now, the bodies of those condemned to hanging were allowed to swing till they rotted, or were devoured by carrion birds, which are vultures. Of those who were beheaded, for some found a resting place in the burial plot of St. Peter's Church, which lay outside the walls, not from the Hoggereich. The corpses of criminals were usually disposed of in unhallowed ground. Many were thrown into the Pegnitz River, others burnt. In later times, dead felons were frequently handed over for dissection to hospitals, or to the hangman, who sold parts of the corpse very profitably to the superstitious, as has already been mentioned. Now, let me stop right here. When he says, sold parts of the corpse very profitably to the superstitious, he was selling the organs of the charred witches that were burnt to the wizards, to the alchemists, is what he called them. Okay, now, it would appear, let's continue right here, okay? It would also appear that sick people sometimes bribed the Hawkrichter to allow them to drink the blood streaming from the trunk of the newly beheaded. Bodies left on the gibbet were often robbed of their clothing by ghoulish ruffians, who also stole severed heads or cut off hands, fingers, feet, etc. to sell or use as charms. Now, the Hawkrichter was the individual that took care of all the financial transactions that was going down during the execution, which, as you see the reference to the gibbet right here, a new gibbet may have to be created, a new scaffold might have to be erected. We have to go get the faggots for the burning. We have to go get the branding iron. We got to melt down some iron. We gonna pour some lead in it. We gonna do it. So hold on. We got the hanging right here. Okay. This comes from the 1919 genocide of Armenia. Now, as so many hangmen were incompetent, a number of people hanged were not completely dead after being cut down. John Hunter, the famous surgeon, secured the body of a hanged man from Newgate, but when he started to dissect it for his anatomy class, the corpse sat up and demanded, "What do you think you were doing?" Okay? I don't know. That's an odd one. Alright, now crucifixion. So, okay. There's many different crosses that we have here for the crucifixion. This is a real picture from 1919 Armenian genocide. So the crosses lasted all the way into this time period. This is the crucifixion spike. Now, when we say this crucifixion spike with Jesus, right? They say the spike went through his hand, right? No, that's anatomically incorrect. You could not have done it through his hand. The weight of his body would have pulled his hand off, or you know what I'm saying, very shortly. So it had to be done in the wrist cusp. It has to be done right at the bottom part of where your two bones in your arm connect, okay? Your two bones in your forearm. Okay, right at the wrist area. Okay? Now, the stripping, says Limborg, is performed without regard to humanity or honor, not only to men but to women and virgins, the most virtuous and chaste of whom they have sometimes in the prisons, for they cause them to be stripped even to their very ships, which they afterwards take off, forgive the expression, even to their pudenda, and then put on their straight linen drawers. Now, should anyone commit a fault, he is flogged in a most cruel manner. They strip him naked and lay him on the ground, with his face downwards, and in this position he is held by several men, while others flog him most unmercifully, with cords stiffened by being dipped in melted pitch, which brings away flesh at every stroke, until the back is one large ulcer. This is the gallows cart. Now, you have to understand what that stripping was really saying. The stripper was saying, when we taking you to the execution, you're going to be butt naked, walking in front of the people. Now, and that's also the process that we go through in jail today. As soon as you get in the jail, that's the first thing they do. They strip you butt naked. They got you bending over and coughing and whatnot. All right. Now, the Gulls cart. The cart is empty, and the reason why the cart is empty and it's open like this is so the citizens, the mob, can attack you. You have to understand that the mob is the first form of common law, okay? And that's what would usually happen. We find out that you are the defunct child molester, okay? We will come to your house and you will be the entertainment for the evening, all right? And for the poor bums on the corner, you will be their food. You will be dessert today. That's how that will go down. So the tumbrel. The tumbrel is another form of cart. As you can see, it was open, but also this is a torture device called the ducking stool at the same time. We'll go over there. We'll go over that shortly. Okay. So the rocks. You have to understand that in market, the farmers could sell all their bad produce because the people would have to have produce to throw at the people in this pillory or in the stocks or in the Gulls cart or whatever is going on. There's going to be a criminal today, and he's going to be the entertainment. So the head cage, as it was stated in the Branks, the head cage is something that was worn when we walked you around the city. Sometimes this would be the only crime. I mean, this would be the only charge for your crime. It's like, nigga, we gonna walk your ass from the four corners of the city. You gonna go to every gate, nigga, wearing the head cage, okay? And all the children is gonna throw the rotten tomatoes at your ass, and that's what's gonna happen. Okay, so the flogging. We got the flogging going down and sometimes right up in here. They put pieces of bone, tar, glass, rock, round little balls, and even they have one called the scorpion with hooks on it. And the hooks are designed to catch onto your ribs and pull. Okay. Now, it was in the reign of King Henry VIII, and in the year 1530 that the famous Whipping Act was instituted, directing that vagrants were to be carried to some market town or other place, and there tied to the end of a cart naked and beaten with whips throughout the market town or other place till the body shall be bloody by reason of such whipping. Okay. It was formerly the custom in London and other places at the time of executions for parents to whip their children, so as to impress upon their minds the awful lessons of the gallows. Executions were very often occurring for people who were hanged for trifling offenses. All right. So basically, they'd take them to the execution and whoop their ass right there in the market while they watching somebody getting killed. So I guess that's pressing the pain on the trauma. I mean, that is mixing the trauma. I mean, they've mastered their trauma, man. So ball and chain here. We have ball and chain. This is the only real one that's in existence from the old world. Okay, bilbos. This is the original ankle bracelet. Okay. And I know you've probably seen these before when researching into history, and you never knew their name because that's not where they come from. They weren't created for African slaves. They were created for European criminals. Okay, just like this tongue terror right here. Okay. The tongue terror, we apply this red hot. Okay. And we open the mouth and we rip out the tongue of the blasphemer. Okay. Of the heretic. The tongues. These were used for the ripping off of the toenails, fingernails. The nose, the lips, the teeth, the ears, the eyelids, what else? Your nipples, that little pink part down there you got hidden down there. Yeah, we rip off your little wee-wee. Hey, that's what these things is used for, man, seriously. The thumb screw. Okay. We obliterate the thumb. We crush all the bone matter on the thumbs. Notice another heart we have right here. Okay. And we have the iron gag. The iron box on the inside is forced into the mouth and the collar fastened behind his neck. The victim's screams are stifled so as not to disturb the conversation of the torturers. The small hole in the gag, if plugged with a fingertip, blocked the passage of air and caused suffocation. Okay? These were also worn on the way to the gallows, on the way to the scaffold, or on the way to being burnt at the stake. So you couldn't be a blasphemer. You couldn't blaspheme the process of you being burnt. We don't want to hear your vulgarities. We do not want to hear your profanities when we are about to burn your ass. Okay. The heretic catcher. It was believed that if a witch or a wizard, if you touched a witch or a wizard, you would, in essence, go to hell and become part of the devil's league. Okay? And so you were not to touch the witch. So they would put these on them and march them in. Okay? And this right here is called the Spanish collar. Okay? No. Okay. The Iron Crown. A late 16th century iron crown of torture that was heated red hot and then lowered onto the head of a victim. Primarily used on anyone who conspired to steal the throne or commit the assassination of a ruler. And we see right here, the iron crown is right here in this painting. As I stated earlier, you see them using the tongs red hot to rip off the flesh and the sinews. And the date is 1514. And notice the thin metal, so it could get red hot quick. Okay. Now the Nabi crown, which is another form. You know, another crown that they used, and they would usually make them wear these on the way to the scaffold once again. And they'd be butt naked. So you'd be butt naked walking to the scaffold and somebody pushing you with a stick on a collar, and then you got a branks on your head, and then you might be wearing one of these crowns too. So you wear one of these crowns, the Nabi crown, and it's screwed in right here, as we can see, to puncture holes into the skull. Alright. This one is called the breast ripper. This one is called the Spanish spider breast ripper. Okay, this one got all sides of it. And I think this one is like England, or could be. But they were applied red hot. Alright. And we'd sear off the flesh of the titty off the woman. Alright. Now, in Scotland, oh, and let me state this as well. This is used for a criminal offense. So women who killed their children, and women who were adulterers, and women who were thieves, and prostitute thieves is really what it was. It wasn't the necessary fact that you were a prostitute. It was the fact that you were one of these prostitutes that set men up and robbing them and getting them killed and all that type of stuff. So we use this on you, nice and red hot. And also, a way they punished women who killed their babies, infanticide, was they made them wear the corpse of the infant until the corpse rotted all the way into bones. They used to make them wear it around their neck like a necklace. Okay. So, in Scotland, the jogs were usually fashioned to a church door, a tree in a churchyard, the post of a church gate, a market cross, or a market tron, or a weighing post, and not infrequently to prison doors. These would also be outside the city at the gate, and prisoners would have to sit there as well to forewarn those that came into the city. So, persons neglecting to attend church on Sunday were frequently put into the jogs. This was majority a church torture, and if you acted a fool in church, they just put you into this, and it was a chain with a collar on it attached to the concrete wall, as you can see here. Okay. Now, the stocks. Okay. In old times, they didn't put these stools right here. If you were too short to fit into the stocks, then they put you in there anyways, and your feet would, and your body would just pull the weight of your whole being, and then your neck would break, and your hands would turn black, and blood would come out your nose, your mouth, your ears, and your eyes. And it has been documented like that. This is the pillory bird cage. You have to understand that if you were to do your own research with this subject, as you'll be going over several different time periods in several different countries, the word stocks and the word pillory can be interchangeable sometimes, but as to be hardcore with it, these are the stocks right here, and this is the pillory bird cage. And this pillory word can also be interchangeable with the gibbet word. So, anyways, in the pillory, you'd hang up until you rotted. Sometimes they'd give you charges of sitting in here for 3 hours a day for 1 day of every month for the rest of your life. Okay? And people would poke you with sticks, throw rocks at you, throw food at you, and whatnot. But then again, they'd also have a lot of these sitting at the crossways of the roads, sitting at cross sections of roads, and it would be nothing but bones in there because the person completely fully decomposed. And there was time periods in England where they said that there was one of these at every single cross section, with somebody hanging in it at a different stage of decomposition. Now, in the pillory, depending on the temper of the crowd, the pillory could be either a comparatively mild form of punishment or a death sentence. If an unpopular prisoner was pilloried, a large mob would gather carrying stones, mud pies, rotten eggs, and decayed vegetables. In London, the vegetable stalls at Covent Garden did a brisk trade selling worthless produce for this purpose. After the current Jack Ketch, which is a nickname for an executioner, had fastened the prisoner in the pillory, he had to run for his life as the shower of rocks and garbage started. As the prisoner could not use his hands, he often suffocated from the sticky mass covering his face. If he had any money, he would bribe Ketch to stand below the pillory's platform and keep wiping his face with a long pole. Okay. This is the gibbet iron, which is sort of just like a pillory, except for, as you can see here, there is a division in the legs. So these were usually made specifically for your body's size. And if you were obese or fat, they would make a joke out of it by making it too small for you and forcing you in it, as it is a torture device anyways. These devices are famously known for leaving the top part of the skull inside the cage when all the rest of the bones have fallen down to nothing. Okay? And that's because the gibbet iron was so tightly made on the human. Now, you also got to understand that sometimes they would put tar on the person and then set them afire while they were hanging in one of these. Okay. Now, Mount Falcon. Think about this right here. Take one of these and then put it right here in one of these, okay? So you got 45 slots right here, my friends. And there was a gibbet iron in each one of these with a body rotting at a different stage, as you can see over here as well. And see the birds that were flying and feasting on all the rotten bodies. Now, if you were a new criminal, they'd walk you in here and then hang you up in one of these things. And you probably see in one of these slots a guy that was alive, another slot where there's nothing but bones, and then another slot where there's a guy that's probably decomposing for the past 6 months. He's in the 6-month stage of decomposition. Okay, so you'll be seeing and smelling all of that when the wind blows, and then you'll be watching birds picking on everybody, and the birds may not even wait. They're so used to it, they've been eating on so many bodies right here that they may not even wait for you to die, and they say, hey, they just hung up a new one, he's fresh, I like my meat warm. Fuck that bullshit. I'm gonna come down here and give me taste. Okay? So this is the scaffold. Now, in relation to what I was saying about Lowe's, the department store scaffold in today's language would be a building that you use on the side of skyscrapers to clean windows and or to build and construct apartment buildings. Okay? The scaffold is used for that. What you see up here is the process called breaking the will. But this is the scaffold. Okay? It is the platform of death. Basically, it is the platform where we hold the executions and the entertainment is viewed. Now, breaking the will. We twist the limbs in said fashion through the spokes. Okay? Like this here. And if you see another one where we can put a person on a wheel and then drag them on spikes. As we notice here, there's a spiked wheel. And we hook these spikes within the back on the person's ribs, and we twist them on. We twist and we twirl the wheel, and it goes over a fire underneath here. And the fire right here will slowly roast the person. And then right here we have another wheel, and this wheel has an iron rim on it on both sides. If you see. Now, breaking on the wheel, especially on the continent, was so common that it almost became the standard manner of executing criminals. A large wheel, like a cartwheel, was mounted vertically on a scaffold. The condemned was tied spread-eagled on the wheel, his arm and legs extended as far as possible and fastened to the rim, so they were approximately at right angles to the spokes. The executioner then broke each bone separately with an iron bar, finally killing the prisoner with a blow across the chest. In certain cases, the final blow was not given. The executioner broke the man's ribs, and the wheel was then mounted on a pole, set through the hub, the condemned being left to die slowly. A variation of this torture consisted of putting each of the condemned's limbs, one after the other, in a wooden trough with vertical slits cut in the sides. The executioner then used a small but very heavy wheel with an iron rim that he dropped through the slits in succession, crushing the limb by degrees, starting at the extremity and working up to the body. This device was usually used in torture chambers because it was not so suitable for public display as breaking on the wheel. Okay. The cauldron. Now. Okay. Other martyrs were cooked in pots, cauldrons, and frying pans. Some of the pots had detachable handles, so the executioners could insert the handles after the victim had been immersed for some time in boiling oil or water, and carry the pot around the arena without having the handles become too hot to hold. Saint Boniface died in this manner, his knees having first been doubled up and his head tied to them so he would fit in the pot. The cauldrons were much bigger and could hold several Christians at the same time. The victims were tied together, one man's ankle to the next man's wrist, and put in the cauldron while the water was still cold. Then the fire was lighted, and the struggles of the prisoners to escape while roped together afforded much amusement. Unlike the frying pan used by Antiochus, the pans in the arenas were large enough to hold an entire man. Okay? Now you have to understand that they also had a process called parboiling, where they would boil the amputated parts and the heads of the bodies. Okay, then after that they would dip it in tar and then hang them up because it would preserve it for longer for people to see. Now, this parboiling was with cumin seed, salt, and I think lemon or some other ingredient, and yeah, that's what parboiling was. And they would also do that with the human heads. Now, boiled to death. In the year 1531, when Henry VIII was king, an act was passed for boiling prisoners to death. The preamble of the statute states that one Richard Roos or Coke, a cook, by putting poison in some food intended for the household of the Bishop of Rochester and for the poor of the parish in which his lordship's palace was situated in Lambeth Marsh, occasioned the death of a man and a woman and the serious illness of several others. He was found guilty of treason and sentenced to be boiled to death without benefit of the clergy. That is, that no abatement of the sentence was to be made on account of his ecclesiastical connection, nor to be allowed any indemnity such was commonly the privilege of clerical offenders. He was publicly boiled to death at Smithfield, and the act ordained that all manner of prisoners should meet with the same doom henceforth. Sawed in half. This is where it goes down. You hang them upside down. You know, Johnny gets on the other side. We get to sawing back and forth, back and forth. They would do this with you hanging upside down, and they also had a process of doing this when you standing up. They would already have slits in 2 plaques of wood that are vertical, and then they would have you stand up in between those 2 packs, and then between those 2 planks, and then just keep on sawing back and forth, starting at the top of your head. But they started doing it like this by majority rule because the person could live longer and feel more pain, which is the true definition of torture, is we want you to live as long as possible so you can feel the highest level amount of pain. Okay? This is a death by 1,000 cuts. This is a Chinese torture. I put it in here because it was interesting. The strips of flesh were then cut off with a sharp knife and the shirt tightened again. A more common form was simply to cut off portions of the body, one after another, according to a carefully devised plan that would keep the victim alive until the end. However, this generally meant that the number of cuts had to be limited to 120, 72, 36, or 24. The death of 24 cuts went like this. Cuts 1 and 2, the eyebrows, 3 and 4, the shoulders, 5 and 6, the breast, 7 and 8, the forearms, 9 and 10, the upper arms, 11 and 12, the buttocks, 13 and 14, the calves, 15 and 16, heels, 17 and 18, hands, 19 and 20, arms, 21 and 22, feet, 23 and 24, legs. This is the rake. The origin to the rake you used to use with mommy raking up the leaves in the front yard. This would be applied real hot, and it would drag the bone out of the back. This is called the barrel roll. Okay? You can die in this one, but it's most likely that you won't. Depending on how big the spikes are. They used to use this one on heels. Push people down the heels while inside the barrel. Alright. Now, burning alive was from early times the recognized method of uprooting heretical notions of religious belief of every class. The first to suffer from this cause in England was Alban, who died at the stake in the year AD 304. Since his day, thousands have suffered death on account of their religious belief through intolerance, but that is not a subject we intend dealing with at the present time. Burning alive was the most common form of torturous death employed in the Middle Ages. One method was used by the Spanish Inquisition has already been described. The most common technique was simply to tie the victim to a stake and surround her, the victims were originally women, with faggots. But sometimes the stake was surrounded by a circular wall of faggots, an opening being left in the wall so the condemned could be led through it and tied to the stake. The gap was then filled in. This is how Joan of Arc died. Although the artistic purposes, she is usually shown tied on top of a heap of faggots. The faggot wall was so high that after her death, the executioners had to pull it down with bill hooks so the crowd could see that her charred remains and be convinced that the witch hadn't escaped by art magic. Okay? By the late 18th century, only individuals guilty of treason could be burned, but treason included counterfeiting or poisoning your husband but not your wife. According to law, counterfeiting was a defiance of the king's authority. Hearsay was a defiance of God, and a wife stood in the same relation to her husband as she did to God. Okay? These are the original faggots right here. There is an account of burning at Lincoln in 1722. Eleanor Ellison was condemned to death for the murder of her husband and was ordered to be burnt at the stake. She was clothed in a cloth and made like a ship, saturated with tar, and her limbs were also smeared with the same inflammable substance. While a tar bonnet had been placed on her head, she was brought out of the prison barefoot, and being put on a hurdle, was drawn on a sledge to the place of execution near the gallows. Upon arrival, some time was passed in prayer, after which the executioner placed her on a tar barrel, a height of 3 feet, against the stake. A rope ran through a pulley in the stake and was placed around her neck, she herself fixing it with her hands. The irons also held her body to the stake, and the rope being pulled tight, the tar barrel was taken aside and the fire lighted. Alright, now, this is the flame. Alright, now, the instruments for flame do not indicate that a victim was skinned after the fashion adopted by butchers of cattle. The man or woman was strung up by the hands or feet, while the skin with the flesh adhering to it was dragged off with prolonged hooks. Some of the torture implements are of polished steel, damascens with pious inscriptions. Okay. The shackles especially are punctured with holes in the form of a cross. Among the iron used for branding, the letter U predominates, which in most languages means unbeliever. The little coal stove in which the branding iron was heated, together with the bellows used for blowing up the fire in it, are exhibited. Executioner's swords are numerous and ornamental. The average blade is some 2 feet 9 inches in length by 2 3/4 inches in width. Alright. The end is blunt as though broken off, and the handle is made to be grasped with both hands. Alright. Sorry about the way that read, but yeah, this is the way flaying is. I had to read the whole thing for y'all. I have to be explanatory. Okay? So, this is the flaying knife that was just mentioned. And that is a fully flayed human skin. Right here. Alright. Now the strapido. Prisoners were hung by one arm, a leg, by the genitals, by their hair, or by their thumbs. Sometimes their wrists were tied to their ankles. A bar passed between their forearms and their knees, and they were swung from the bar. This was to hold them in a convenient position for further tortures. Once the person was suspended, he could be beaten. Weights could be attached to various parts of the body, which was then spun into other things. Okay? Now, I want to state that this weight right here, what you see, sometimes will be shaped as a cherubim, or shaped as, a lion's head, or shaped as a demon, or shaped as the Archangel Michael or something. They always had some type of deep significance with writing on the tools that were used. Alright, impalement. Now, this is how you impale somebody. You lay down the stake, you impale them in the rectum, you have somebody hold down the neck, and then you have 2 men on each foot pulling the body up and the stake up at the same time as the stake has a hole right here. Okay? That is what you see right here. That's going on. Now, impalement. Okay? 1600 painting of some women being impaled. This is the garrote. Okay? The garrote made it all the way up to the 1900s and was usually a torture device set up for jails. Okay? Now, these the liars would sit in these chairs, and what would happen is they would tighten this rope right here, and they tighten it so hard on your neck until the spine splits. Until this spike right here splits your spine and your neck. Okay. Now, another dramatic and occasionally used form of execution was being dragged apart by 4 horses. A horse was fastened to each limb, and the animal was driven in opposite directions. The torture could be prolonged almost indefinitely. The horses being forced to pull in quick jerks and then stopped. The process often took 5 to 6 hours. At last, the horses were whipped up and all 4 limbs came off, leaving the still living trunk. As the tendons of the human body are astonishingly strong, the executioners were often forced to help the horses by cutting the muscles. Collingbourne wrote the following couplet respecting Canterbury, Ratcliffe, and Lovell, giving their advice to Richard III, whose crest it will be remembered as a white boar. The cat, the rat, and Lovell the dog rule all England under a hog. The writing and foregoing couplet, Collingbourne was executed on Tower Hill. After having been hanged, it is recorded he was cut down immediately, and his entrails were then extracted and thrown into the fire. And all this was so speedily performed that Style says when the executioner pulled out his heart, he spoke and said, "Jesus, Jesus." Quartering was inflicted on traitors. whose remains were exhibited on the city gates. The heads of women executed for child murders were nailed above the gallows. The manner in which this exceedingly great torture was inflicted was as follows: that the prisoner shall be remanded to the place from whence he came, and put in some low dark room, and there laid on his back without any manner of covering except a cloth around his middle, and that as many weights should be laid upon him as he can bear, and more, and that he should have no more sustenance but to the worst bread and water, and that he shall not eat the same day on which he drinks, nor drink the same day on which he eats, and he shall so continue until he die. Okay. Ducking stool, as I mentioned earlier. Scolds of both sexes were punished by being ducked. Indeed, in the last observance of the custom, a tailor and his wife were ducked together in view of a large gathering of people. The husband had applied for his wife to undergo the punishment on account of her quarrelsome nature, but the magistrate decided that one was not better than the other, and he he ordered a joint punishment. Now see, that's why we're trying to tell niggas, man, y'all go up in that court and call these police. As soon as you do, they can do whatever they want to. Now, the docking stool, in assisting in the operation of cooling by its means the inflammable passions of some of the female inhabitants of Ipswich. Okay. Mr. Bilby, who held the office of town's husband, was ordered to take care that a ducking stool should be provided at the south end for the benefit of scolds and quiet women. The chair hangs just over the water. They place the woman in this chair and so plunge her into the water as often as the sentence directs, in order to cool her in moderate heat. The Halifax gibbet. This is the beginner stages of the guillotine. It would be so that the offender be apprehended for an ox, sheep, kine, horse, or any other cattle. The said beast or other of its kind shall have the end of the rope tied somewhere unto them, so that they, being driven, do draw out the pin whereby the offender is executed. There is and has been of ancient times, says Holinshed's, a law of rather custom at Halifax, that whosoever doth commit any felony, and is taken with the same, or confess the fact upon examination, it will be valued by 4 constables and account to the sum of 13 pence halfpenny. He is forthwith beheaded upon one of the next market days, which fall usually upon the Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, or else open the same day that he is convicted if market be holding. Yup, this is the guillotine. This is the intestinal crank. Alright. Let me show you how this one works. Inside the torture chamber. Torture was introduced for the express purpose of extracting confession, being authorized by Pope Innocent in a bull issued in 1252. The Inquisitors reduced torture to something approaching a fine art, and in the process showed the possession of much psychological knowledge and insight, the procedure being nicely calculated to wear down the resistance even of the strongest minded and most powerfully built man. First, the accused was threatened with torture, which threat in itself and often the desired effect. If this failed to extort confession, he was conducted to the torture chamber and shown the instruments used. This torture chamber was well designed to afflict all except those possessing nerves of iron with horror, dread, and despair. It was usually an underground apartment devoid of windows and lighted with nothing better than a couple of candles. Now, the Inquisition made torture more than merely a method of inflicting pain. They transformed it into an art and science. Great emphasis was put on the psychological approach preceding the actual torture. The accused was arrested at night, pulled out of bed by the thick black-robed marked familiars, and taken to the dungeons in utter silence. Here he was left for several days in solitary confinement and complete darkness. When he was judged to have reached the breaking point, the same masked figures suddenly seized him and dragged him to the torture chamber. Here, behind a long table, sat other mysterious figures with the accused records spread out before them. The floor of the room was covered with sand or sawdust to soak up the blood, and along the well were arranged the torture instruments, painted red or black. The torturers, naked to the waist and wearing black masks, stood among the terrible tools of their trade with folded hands. The only light came from flickering candles. On the walls were inscribed motions such as De Monites El Nist Bauman, say nothing but good of the dead, and Ad Mala Patra Haik Sant Ultra Thun Parate. Dark theaters are suitable for dark deeds. Alright. The eye spoon. This is a Byzantine eye spoon. It was used red hot. You have to scarp out, pull out your eyeballs. But this was used in all countries in old Europe. The lead sprinkler. This is where your salt and pepper shaker comes from. The top half of the sphere is removed, and the lower half is filled with molten metal, boiling oil, or boiling water. Alright. Flicking the sprinkler towards the pinioned victims showers them with the boiling contents of this nasty holy water sprinkler. The Pope's prayer. Parabang was a metal repair with the ability to expand by twisting the stem. This is inserted into orifices such as the mouth, vagina, and anus,
and the expansion causes the orifice to expand and rip until pulverized. If used in the mouth, the pear will knock out and break all teeth and severely dislocate the jaw and palate. Pope's pear. It was sometimes called this because Pope Innocent the 13th endorsed the use of this device annually against homosexuals during the Spanish Inquisition. Okay. Yeah. Now, it was sometimes called this. Pope Innocent 13th endorsed the use of this device annually against homosexuals during the Spanish Inquisition, and it was used red hot as well. Alright, this is the iron boot. You put both feet in the boot, and you put the wedges, the wood wedges in between both legs, and you slam on the wood wedges with a mallet, separating the boot and forcing them out of the boot. This is the foot press. This is the leg press, and it was only used for your lower leg at a time and then your upper leg. It wasn't for the entire leg. The scavenger's daughter. Many men have died in this little iron bar. All you got, iron bars. All you gotta do is put your head in the neck space, and then they put your arms underneath and through the loops of your legs. But this device being tightened when you put it on, it can have you bleeding out of your mouth, nose, ears, and eyes all at the same time. Now this is another scavenger's daughter that breaks open your rib cages and literally twists you in and crushes you. This is the skull crusher. This is self-explanatory. Put your head right here and then crush it down. Pit in the pendulum. I don't think the pit in the pendulum is real. It took too much from number one, from number two. The first time it's historically mentioned is with Edgar Allan Poe. The water torture. The water torture was considered the most terrible and used when other means had failed. The prisoner was tied to a ladder with this head lower than his feet. As iron prong was used to force his mouth open and a strip of linen pushed down his throat. Water was slowly dropped on the linen until the prisoner, in his efforts to avoid being strangled, swallowed the strip. The strip was gradually withdrawn, covered with blood and mucus. The process was then repeated. The amount of water used was carefully measured and could never exceed 8 quarts at any one time. Otherwise, the prisoner might suffocate. Though specific circumstances differed, in every case a restrained and gagged victim was forced to swallow by means of a funnel a large amount of unappetizing, sometimes boiling liquid, molten lead or brass, sometimes such as urine, excrement, liquid manure, and silage were used for this purpose. Then my trembling body was laid upon. This is the case. This is the rack now. These racks now. Hold on. This is the lattice rack right here. This is the rack with spikes, and there's also spikes on the table of this rack. These spikes didn't start later on, okay? But in the beginning, it was just a regular rack that dislocated all your joints. Then my trembling body was laid upon the face of a flat rack with my head downward, enclosed within a circled hole, my belly upmost, my arms and feet pinioned, for I was to receive my main torments. Now ropes were passed over the calf of my leg, and middle of my thigh, and the great of my men, and these ropes fastened to pins. I received 7 tortures, each torture consisting of 3 complete windings of the pins. This is the Iron Maiden, which was supposedly made in Rome. I don't think it's necessarily true. It's really, the first name was Nabis of Arpegia. Nabis is a king and a satirist of Sparta. And supposedly he made this device originally to hug you, and then when it hugs you, it chops you up by said spikes, and then you fall through a trapdoor at the bottom so the body can be discarded like in the water or something. Okay? I don't believe it because it was too intricate for the time periods to be trying to develop something in so much detail. Okay? And also another rumor is that the spikes are strategically located so they don't puncture your lungs, so you can live as long as possible as they torture you. The witch's chair, also known as the mother-in-law's chair, also known as the Christian's chair. Okay. Heretics were put in here. Blasphemers were put in here. And then they'd apply weights to you. And they just start screwing down sections. They'll just flatten that on your head. This is the Judas cradle. The Judas cradle is specifically designed for homosexuals, supposedly. So they put your body in here and they hoist you up and they pull these strings right here down and forth. You know, and basically they made a game out of it. The Spanish donkey. Okay, this is the Spanish donkey. They put the weights on your feet and it'll split you right in two. This is the brazen bull. I don't think the brazen bull is real. The brazen bull has never been found, even though you will see it historically. The story of this person, of the person who made it, is that as soon as he made it, he got thrown into the said bull as well, so we could hear the screams that it made through the pipes. Supposedly there's pipes behind the nose that when you scream from being burnt to death, that you sound like a bull making its howl noises, okay? Now this is the jail, the hand brand. Alright. This was specifically for liars, just like this one is. Okay? And you gotta balance yourself with your hands as there's weights, and there's supposed to be people on each side turning it, as you can see right here, alright? Now this is the treadmill. Okay, this is where your original treadmill comes from. And this was a jailbird torture as well. Now, the reason it was created was because the soldiers had nothing else to do. They had to figure out, they had to start keeping these soldiers occupied during the day. So they put them on this device. Whirligig is a military device where they're always spinning. They keep on spinning you until you throw up all over yourself until everything is nasty. Okay. Now walking the plank. This was done to pirates and also the sailors, because usually there were sharks following the ships. Alright, so you wasn't gonna make it out of the water with this one. Kissing the gunner's daughter is getting whipped on the cannon, and then having the cannon lit, which will disembowel you. Keel hauling is a form of punishment meted out to sailors at sea. The sailor is tied to a line that looped beneath the vessel, thrown overboard on one side of the ship, and dragged under the ship's keel, either from one side of the ship to the other, or the length of the ship from bow to stern, as the hull was usually covered in barnacles and other marine growth. If the offender was pulled quickly, keel hauling would typically result in serious cuts, loss of limb, and even decapitation. If the victim was dragged slowly, his weight might lower him sufficiently to miss the barnacles, but this method would frequently result in his drowning. Alright, last but not least, scaphism of the boats. The execution is performed like this. 2 boats are used that exactly fit. The prisoner is put on his back in one of them, and the other is laid on top of it, but with the man's arms and feet outside, while the rest of his body is inside the boats. They then offer him food, and if he refuses it, they force him to eat by pricking his eyes. Then they drench him with a mixture of milk and honey, pouring it not only in his mouth but all over his face. They keep his face constantly turned toward the sun, and it becomes completely covered by the swarms of flies that settle on it. And as within the boats, he does that which all who eat and drink must do. Creeping things and vermin spring out of the feces, and corruption and rottenness of the excrement, and these enter into his bowels and slowly eat him away. When he is dead and the upper boat is removed, his body is a mass of maggots, and swarms of insects are preying on him, growing in his innards. In this way, Mithridates died after supping from 17 days. Okay. Now this is the picture of some Barbary. Okay, if we look closely, like this one being built into the wall. They say Catholic nuns that were caught being adulterous have been built into the walls of old Catholic churches, including infants that were aborted by these nuns in adulterous unions. Okay? So, please understand, when they say cornerstone, there's usually the bones of somebody in that cornerstone. Okay? This is the kissing the gunner's daughter. If you see the person sitting on the cannon here. Alright. This is just rotting to death in a cell. This one is being split in half by boats. This one is being hung up on the city gates. Okay. This is dragging, which is how the majority of people were brought to the scaffold in the middle of the city, or being brought to the market for punishment. They'd be dragged by the horse, okay? Or whipped at the end of the cart. Now, however, throughout history, especially in ancient Rome and medieval Europe, people in authority had a tendency to abuse their power to discriminate against people they didn't like, or people who didn't fit into their mold, as to who the ideal person was during times when people were superstitious and paranoid and were not allowed to read the Bible for themselves. Common people would accuse others of crimes they didn't commit simply because they didn't get along with them, and usually the accusers were believed, even when there was no evidence. The people blamed would be publicly punished and executed. During the Spanish Inquisition, the priests and cardinals who enforced the Inquisition had license to burn anyone. This is also the same. There's a case right now where there's 6 girls that lied about this boy raping all of them, and the boy is still sitting in jail right now. Okay, he got charged big time, and it all came out through the social media that the girls were liars, and the boy is still sitting in jail. Okay? So, that's the type of situations we have in this country, and the attitude comes from right here. So, now, the prison. The mental torture induced by imprisonment with its destructive effect upon initiative, willpower, originality, and ambition can be incalculable. Upon some natures, the segregation of mind is even more paralyzing and cumulative in its effects than is any form of physical segregation. The contention that the modern prison is a convalescent home or a rest camp and errs on the side of leniency or beneficence is erroneous in its implications, as are the ideas secured by visitors who are conveyed around a model prison upon a tour of inspection. Now, what that's really stating is that the original torture was being exiled. So being separated from time and community is how they figured was the worst form of pain because it's keeping you alive, okay? And you're being tortured by not having the accesses of all humans that you feel you're deprived of. And that's based off of what we understand culturally as a civilization. So in closing, even though in modern times the Western Hemisphere has banned torture and execution is legal in many places, torture is and always has been around and will continue to be. Someday, when space travel becomes commonplace, we may execute people by throwing them into outer space naked or forcing them to go without oxygen. We may someday experience a new wave of torture in which new implements are invented, unlike anything ever seen since ancient Rome, the Spanish Inquisition, or medieval England. Stamping out torture and execution completely will most likely never happen. So, will always be here forevermore. Alright. There goes one of the chastity belts that I was saying was cloth. These are extras at the end. So we have to understand that this whole justice system, religious system, medical system, entertainment system, and a lot of other systems out here was designed off of torture and the collection of millions of innocent souls. And it's going to have to continue to collect innocent souls in order to survive. And part of that agony and part of that pain is what a multitude of different people are feeling when their family members are being slaughtered by these cops. Alright? So please understand the seriousness of what crime and punishment is, and the seriousness of those who are authoritative. Okay? You want to take a drunken husband, we put the brakes on you. You want to break the window pane, we take your ass to the noose. Okay? That's just what it was, that's just what it is, and that's the way it will always be. So, y'all gonna have to go outside 20, man. This is a picture of a devil and a toy in Italy. Okay? I got a lot more stuff coming out. There's an iron gag right here. There's another breast ripper. This is a real statue of the Caligula, okay, of Rome. And this is the boy that was in the Game of Thrones. So if we could peep the similarities, that's just too close. Okay. A torture mask used during the Spanish Inquisition. You pour oil down the ears. Some paintings. I got a lot of stuff. It's going to be coming out in the book. There's going to be a book with all this information. This is insane and solemn steaming box. Okay. This is what being tarred and feathered looks like right here. Okay. Afterwards. Okay. And this is a Chinese torture chair right here. Alrighty, so that's it. Y'all get at me.